Again, my name is Aaron Magnan. This is Fusion 360 for Beginners webinar. Thank you all for attending. So real quick about me, I'm a mechanical engineer. I went to the University of Nevada, Reno. I'm all over LinkedIn. If you want to connect with me, I'd love to hear from you. I'm on Twitter as well. I try to stay on top of that. I can't say I'm as on top of that as I am on LinkedIn, but that's where I'm coming from. In the past, I've worked for companies that manufactured safety products, safety showers, namely. I've also worked for companies that produced sheet metal enclosures for power supplies for computers, and also I worked in the reseller channel for software, essentially for about 5 years now. The goal, and I always like to kind of round this out and make sure that everyone's on the same page, is to learn the basics in Fusion 360. This is intended for completely new users or people who are unfamiliar with 3D design in general. So if that's where you're coming from, never fear that we're going to cover this from the beginning and get into as much as we possibly can. So let's do a quick intro to Fusion 360 for those of you who haven't actually used it. Fusion 360 has a lot of different facets. You can do all kinds of industrial design or conceptual design with the sculpting mode. You can see there's this helmet being built there with some T-splines technology. There's the parametric design and mechanical drawings that a lot of people who are in mechanical industries are familiar with and currently use. There are renderings and animations available. There is a whole CAM portion to this tool. So if you need to actually get your parts produced, even if you're not actually cutting the parts, you can learn about, issues with your design that might make it difficult to machine. So using these tools, you can just gain that additional insight that's important for actually going to production. There's also a simulation aspect, and actually, since I was in the software reselling channel, I've actually focused a lot on simulation. So I do always like to show it. It's something that's very interesting to me. It's something that I think every designer should be using at some point in their design process. I mean, you don't need to have a PhD and mechanical engineering to be able to use these tools. They're easy enough that everyone should be able to get in and learn something about their design, to learn some way to improve them. And I think a lot of people already know this already, but this is the only cloud integrated 3D design tool that's Mac and PC compatible. It's because it has that cloud interface. It's very easy to collaborate. It's very easy to access. I could log in on a friend's computer. I can install it in 5 minutes, and I can actually see all of my data. It's really that easy. It'll also take all your settings over, which is always a beautiful thing. And you're working in a familiar environment, even if you're not on the exact same system. And it's easy to update. Updates happen in a matter of seconds. So let's get into the user interface and kind of introduce you to what we're going to be working with, and this will make it easier for you to understand what I'm actually referring to. So, and I'm gonna try to point out a couple of these things in this slide, but I'm gonna also try to call it out when I'm in the software itself. But at the top of the screen, you'll kind of see your traditional kind of file menu where you can open or you can save items, you can undo and redo changes to your designs. And this little guy right here, this is where you're going to access your data panel, which will give you all of your designs that you've been working on, all your different projects, etc. Depending on your workspace, you're going to have a different toolbar that shows up here. And this is actually kind of an older version of this. We've updated this in a recent release, but this is where you're going to access tools to make your designs, to modify your designs, to add joints and mechanics to your designs, etc. In the actual kind of work interface, canvas, if you will, you'll see the actual designs that you're working on. And you'll also see on the left-hand side, you'll see the browser, which represents all the various components or bodies or canvases, sketches, etc. that go into making a design like this. In the top right hand side of this, you're going to see a cube, a view cube, which you can use to manipulate views to change to left view, right view, top view, etc. I'll show you some ways that you can actually alter these views because sometimes it doesn't quite orient the way that you want. Down at the bottom, you can see a lot of your navigation settings to orbit in certain ways, to pan, to zoom in and out, etc. But a lot of these are actually accessible from your mouse and using keyboard shortcuts and your mouse in conjunction. And then at the bottom, I think the last really important thing here is the timeline. So as you build up your designs, you're going to be able to go through and actually roll it back to make changes earlier in the design. You can roll it back to just see how something might have been built if it's not a design that you worked on, and it's a really handy tool to gain a deep understanding of what's going on there. And this thing is a very handy little guy. This is your mouse shortcuts. If you right click and hold, it'll open up these abilities, and it's going to enable you to actually access a lot of common commands per whatever design you're currently working on. So some really cool stuff there. In the top right hand, you'll see your actual like user account and preferences and help options that are available there. But let's get into that. Last thing is, this is just one. I mean, the interface is actually consistent throughout all these various workspaces. What will change is what you're actually doing in each workspace. So the one that you're currently looking at is where you'll probably be spending most of your time, which is modeling. In addition to the modeling workspace, we have a patch workspace, which is essentially like surfacing, if you will, if you're familiar with other tools. There's the ability to access a rendering environment. So, you can apply your appearances in the modeling workspace. It'll come over your rendering workspace, and you can start to generate that really high quality imagery for marketing purposes or, whatever purposes you really want. There's an animation workspace, there's a simulation workspace, and there's also a cam workspace. So animation, just like it sounds, you can show how something actually operates. Your simulation workspace will enable you to do those tests on your model to see how strong it is, or how you might be able to change it to make it stronger. And then the cam workspace is where you'll actually go to make toolpaths and show how something might be constructed. So navigating, and I wouldn't try to understand it all by just looking at this. I'm gonna show you when we're actually in the software, which will be as soon as we're done with the slide. But essentially, you can scroll by clicking the middle mouse wheel, and you can pan by clicking and holding the mouse wheel and moving your mouse. You can zoom in and out by spinning the mouse wheel. You can use the shift and mouse wheel button to rotate. And then you can also use your Mac trackpads to do quite a lot. I have coworkers that hardly use mouses or use a mice. Sorry, that's not right. I have coworkers who don't use a mouse to actually navigate their designs, which is pretty incredible considering how complex these things can get. So really neat stuff. And let's get into actually looking at Fusion. So this is what Fusion will look like when you first install it. When you first open it up, there might be a couple little differences. I think there's actually some windows that kind of point you to different areas of the interface to help get you started. But when you reopen it and you don't have a design open, this is what it'll look like. It does always have a design open, so you can see this is just an untitled design, unsaved as well. But I want to open up a model so I can actually show you some of these navigation tools. So I'm going to actually do this by accessing my data panel. So if you move your mouse cursor over this top left icon, that's going to give you a tooltip that says show data panel. And I would encourage you, if you do have questions on what each tool does, look at the tooltips. Just let your mouse hover there for a moment. It'll tell you what every little icon is going to do for you. So let's access that data panel. And you can see I have a number of different projects, depending on what I'm working on from day to day. But the one I'm looking for is in this Fusion 101 folder. And actually, these are just folders and designs that I've worked on. My projects list is a little bit even more extensive. But my Fusion 101, my basics class here, I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to show you the model that we're going to be building up in this. And so we'll just double click on this pipe clamp. And this is just a model that I found just as an example. I thought it was kind of neat. It's got a little complexity to it. It's got some mechanics to it. And essentially we're going to try to build this up during this 1 hour session that we have. And that is going nice and slow so everyone can see and understand what I'm doing. So now that I have that open, I don't need to continue seeing my data panel. I can just hit the X up here to close it, and then I can move my mouse cursor right into this workspace that I want to be accessing at this point. So again, let's talk about some of these navigation techniques. If I click and hold the mouse wheel, your icon will change to show you that little hand, and that is going to indicate that you're panning back and forth. So I'm just going to move this back and forth a couple times just to indicate what we're doing there. Once I let go, the mouse cursor changes to indicate, you're just back in your normal selection tool. If I instead want to zoom in and out, I can spin the wheel one way or the other, and you can change what one does or the other does. One thing to pay attention to is that wherever your mouse is pointed, that's where it wants to zoom into. So if I'm down here in this lower left-hand corner, I'm going to lose my model. So that brings up another nice little shortcut. If you double click the wheel, it actually does a zoom to fit. So you're looking directly at this model at a scale that is appropriate for what we're working with. So let's get my mouse cursor back in here and say I want to zoom really close on this guy. Just pay attention to where that mouse is pointing and spin that wheel. The last thing is if you hit shift and click the mouse wheel and hold it, it's going to indicate that it's orbiting at this point. So there's actually two different ways of orbiting, and the one that I'm using is the one that I'd recommend that you use. It makes it a little bit easier to handle. The orbit that I'm using is this constrained orbit, so it treats it as if your model is kind of on like a lazy Susan. So it's going to rotate about like a top plane. If you check the view cube up here in the upper right hand corner, you can see it is going to maintain that top plane orientation. There's also the free orbit option. I'm going to just change this real quick by clicking here and zoom to fit again. And now this case, when I start rotating, it'll go any which way. And so it kind of tumbles around. And sometimes you do need this flexibility, so it's good to know where to access it. But I would recommend that especially for new users, that you try to leverage that constrained orbit option. And on that note, and even talking about zooming in and out and this and that, let's check our preferences. So to check your preferences, we're going to just use the drop down under your name, your account name that should pop up there. Here you can access your account, your preferences. You can look at your profile information. You can sign out. The help icon up here will also take you to some options to do some additional learning techniques or tutorials or whatever it is that you're looking to do. In this case, though, I wanted to bring you to preferences, which will enable us to do things like change, default orbit type from constrained to free, etc. Reverse the zoom direction. I would recommend that you familiarize yourself with these, but on your first use, I wouldn't really recommend changing many of these. The one that I might recommend you change is that if you're familiar with a certain type of software, that you can continue to use that same keyboard shortcuts and mouse shortcuts and view manipulations essentially. So here you can see I have mine set to Fusion by default, but you can also change it to Alias if that's what you're familiar with, Inventor, or SolidWorks as well. So nice little options there to help you learn and kind of jump right into Fusion without having to overcome a big learning curve. Okay, so we're going to click OK to that. And I think that we've covered the navigation techniques well enough. So let's continue on and talk about this model. So this is kind of showing one of the components of this larger assembly that we're going to be building. So this is the model that we're going to be building, and I'm going to leverage this rule number one, and this is something that was taught to me by our forum contributors, so guys that have been using Fusion 360 longer than I have, and what they recommend is if you're going to be building an assembly or really they recommend this for any type of design, but if you're going to be building something in Fusion 360, they recommend that you create a new component and activate it. And that might not make sense at this moment, but we'll get into that and we'll talk about why you might want to do this as we actually get into the design. So the first model that I'm going to do is going to be as simple as I can possibly make it. It's going to leverage these what are called primitives, and primitives can get you some actually pretty complex shapes. I mean, uh, sphere, cylinder, and rectangular box are pretty simple to make otherwise, but these other ones like the coil and the toroid, these are not so easy to make all the time. So there are some cases where you want to leverage these primitives, and I'm going to use one in this first example. So jumping back into Fusion 360, I'm going to change to a new model. I'm going to check back on this a little bit later, but let's create a new design here. And I'm going to, well, okay, let's lay out what this model actually is. This model is actually a pipe clamp. So the first thing I actually want to build here is actually a representation of the pipe, and I don't necessarily need it to be like, hollowed out. I don't need to worry about wall thicknesses. I just want to, I'm building the clamp today. I just want to show the general pipe size so that I understand what I'm working with. So let's get into this and let's make this. And to make that pipe, I can use a primitive as you saw in that list. So I'm going to just jump over to using these primitives, and they're going to be found under your create dropdown. And so this is where you'll go to create a lot of these different shapes and geometry that will build up into these extremely complex models as you essentially just add more and more detail to what you're working on. So these primitives are located down here. You can see box, cylinder, sphere, toroid, coil, and pipe. I'm not actually going to be using pipe is the funny thing, but let's select my cylinder. And when you're doing this, you'll see it actually kind of tells me what it's looking for. It's looking for a plane or a planar face to sketch on to make this cylindrical shape. It actually opens up a grid to help me visualize the size, and actually enables me to understand, which plane I might be selecting if I just click out in space. So I want to select on this one. I want to sketch this from the front view. So I'll just click on this face, and I can also come around and look at this from the front when I do this. And one of the options in the preferences is to actually make it normal too when you actually go into something like this. So it might be something you might want to look into. At this point, however, I do want to turn on my origin and details, those original three planes that are in this 3D and work environment that I can access and see at all times. But well, I wasn't able to see them then, but all I need to do is click this light bulb to hide or show it. So at this point, I'm going to move my cursor over this center point, this origin, click once, and I can key in a value here. Now, right now it's in millimeters, and that's really not how I want to be designing this, but it doesn't matter. We do have some nice options here to work past this. So I'm going to say 2 and type in IN. It's going to actually convert that into an inch dimension. Once I click enter, we have created this cylinder, and to really visualize this, I'm going to rotate around again, just holding shift and my mouse wheel button. And you can see it's going to currently extrude up 5 millimeters, and I can get in here and I can change that. And again, I can key in, inches here. I can say 5 IN. It's going to convert that for us. And you're going to see it enables me to create a new body, or I could actually go into creating this new component. And, I actually did not follow rule number 1. I did not create that component to start. And that's just because these primitives, it doesn't really require a lot of input, sketches, etc. So I'm going to just create this new component here, click that button, and click OK. So we've created this pipe, and right now it's showing in my browser as component 1, and that's not really giving me the information that I need. So I can just do a slow left click twice on this, and it's going to enable me to rename this, and I can call it whatever I want, call it pipe, and click away. Okay, so that's a nice little placeholder, and primitives are good to some extent, but they're also somewhat limiting. They're not something that I'd recommend that you use every time you're designing something. I mean, their name indicates that they'll be easier to work with, but really I think if you work in Fusion longer and longer, you'll see there are some limitations to primitives that will I would recommend to use other sculpting methods, which I'll get into in just a moment. So one thing I actually want to do with this is I want to make this 5 inches out this direction as well. So off this back end here, just because I want to design about the origin. It's always just good practice to do that, and it'll help me as I go and I add additional features to this. So I'm going to use a tool here. This is called Press Pull, and I can select that back face. And again, I can add 5 inches to the back of this. So there we go. We have a 10-inch pipe with a 2-inch diameter, 10-inch length with a 2-inch diameter. And this is what we want to create this pipe clamp for. Continue on to actually make the next component on this, which is like the saddle piece, the bottom piece of this design. So to show you an idea of what we're actually going to be building, it's going to be this guy right here. This is where we're going to be spending most of our time. So you can see it's got some various shapes there, and doing this with a primitive would be difficult to say the least. So let's jump back into our part, and let's jump back into our PowerPoint actually for a moment to discuss other ways of making geometry. So looks like I did just adhere to rule number 2, even though I missed rule number 1 on that first go. Well, I'll try to remember on this next one. And I'm still new to this rule. It did just get introduced to me actually 2 weeks ago now. So something that, just takes a little time to make automatic into your design function. But starting from sketches is another way that you can make more complex geometry that's actually easier to edit down the line, which is really important because a lot of times your designs will change, whether it's something you find out in a prototyping phase or, you just don't like the looks of something. It could be as simple as that. So using sketches to make 3D objects is a really powerful way to do this. And you can use things like dimensions to drive the actual size. You can use things like relationships to ensure that, your design intent is followed. So continuing on, let's look at some of these various shapes and how you might want to approach them. So if you look at the box, one way to create that is to sketch a square, right? If you sketch the square and then extrude it out, you have now a box. If you think about a cylinder, all you need is a circle, and the same thing, you just need to extrude it out. If you think about this thunderbolt, so if you think about how you might design that, there's a couple of different ways, but obviously the easiest way is to look at that cross-sectional cut if you look at it from the top view and extrude it one more time. But extrude isn't the only way that we have to make things. This item that you see right here could not be made with an extrude, or at least not, it would be impossible to make with an extrude. It would require a lot of other features to actually get that shape. So instead, you can think about a different way to make this. If you think about, the shape that continues around this axis, you can sketch out, a cross-sectional profile once again, and instead of extruding it, you revolve it. So you revolve it about that center axis, which I'll just highlight with my mouse cursor there. Hit this play button, there we go. So really nice, really handy. Different ways to approach this is going to give you that added flexibility that's required to make these things. Okay, so we're back in this, and the first thing I want to do here is I want to make that new component, because if I forget again, I'm going to be very upset with myself. So I'm going to select this button here. This is going to enable you to create a new component. And the reason why we want to do this is that this next piece is actually separate from the pipe, right? This is actually the thing that's going to be holding the pipe. So by doing this, I'm going to select the button to create the new component. And it's going to enable me to bring in bodies or existing components or something into this. You select your parent, which in this case, the top level name of this actual design that we're working in is considered a component. So that's our parent component. We can give it a name. So I'm going to call it saddle. And we can activate it as well. So by activating it, it makes it the active component. And so if I go and I add sketches, if I insert an image in here to use to design around, if I add in, anything, it's going to go into this saddle component that we're working on at this moment. the way that I can tell that it's active is this icon right here. It's showing me that this little circle is essentially toggled, right? If I look at the pipe, you can see it's not filled in. If I look at the top level here, it's not filled in either. So let's make this saddle. So I'm going to start this from a sketch. So I'm going to select to insert a sketch. And you can see again, it actually enables me to see the origin and different faces that I could start from. So because I actually have some planar faces like on the ends of these cylinders, I could insert the sketch here, but I want this centered on this existing pipe. That's why I actually added the 5 inches on the back end of this. So let's select the plane at the center of this entire design, this origin. So it's selected, and I can go and I can look at this from the front, and when I'm in my sketch mode, it actually opens up the sketch palette to enable me to add constraints and various things to kind of tie this thing down. So let's sketch this out, and I'm going to leverage some of these shortcuts. So my mouse shortcut, if I right click and hold and bring it straight down, it enables me to access my sketch commands, which will enable me to do things like add circles or rectangles, splines, or dimensions. So I'm going to select right through this one and just let go, and now I'm in my circle tool. Now, I have actually 5 different ways of drawing circles. I could use a 2-point circle, I could use a 3-point circle, etc. I can, do a lot of different things, but the center point circle is the one I'm actually looking for, and what I want to do is I just want to place it at the center point of the entire design, sketch it out to copy essentially the existing sketch there, and that's the start to this sketch. Now from here, I want to actually offset from this existing design. So in this case, I can just hit the O key on my keyboard, and that's going to bring up a keyboard shortcut for offset. Now I don't expect you to learn all these keyboard shortcuts that I'll be using and the mouse shortcuts, so I do want to show you all of these options are accessible from the drop down up here on your toolbar. Here you can see I could get into my circle command, which I could actually leverage by hitting C on my keyboard. You can see all these ones that have shortcuts have a keyboard, have a key essentially next to their name. Offset is an O, that's what I have access here. So I'm going to select this curve, and in this case I want to offset it 1/4 inch. So this is getting annoying, always doing this as typing in IN all the time. So let's do a quick change here. Let's actually just change the design environment to use inches at this point. So I'm going to right click on my units here in my browser. I'm going to change the active units by selecting the icon. And if I move my cursor over here to the menu that popped up, I can change it to whatever it is I want to use. And look at that, it updated that, 6.25 millimeters or whatever it was. Okay, so at this point, I do want to sketch out some lines, and in this case, I'm gonna use the drop down just to show you how to do this. So we'll grab the line tool, and we'll start right from the origin of this, and I'll sketch all the way to the right, and I'll do one more line. You'll see that it actually ended that line because it ended on another entity. We'll do the same from center to the left side. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is I want to do a circle again, a center circle. So I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut once again here. So I'm going to hit the C key on my keyboard. It brings up my center point circle, and I can center it on this point, and I want this to be tangent to the center circle. And that's just to make that little lip that's on our saddle. So I'll click once on the other side as well, and there's our sketch. And I can continue to add other dimensions and other details to this. I can use my right click drop down and access my sketch dimensions. I can say, I want this to be a certain size. I can make things equal to one another by selecting them and using these sketch constraints. You'll see that it won't even allow me to do that because they are being forced to a certain size by the relationships that I added there. So I think we're good with this sketch. Let's go ahead and just stop the sketch at this point, and let's make this into some geometry. So I'm going to rotate around just so you can see where we place that sketch. And it doesn't really look like what we're after at this point, but you'll see that as we make these changes, as we actually turn this sketch into geometry, we'll get that shape that we're after. Okay, so let's do this. And in this case, I want to jump up to my create option. And actually the top level one here is extrude. This is the one that we're going to be using here. But again, I did want to show you this full list. There's things like the revolve that we showed you. Sweep is to do, you make a profile and you can have it follow a path any which way. Ribs to strengthen your plastic parts, etc. But extrude is what we're looking for. And then once I'm in this tool, I can select, what it is I want to extrude. So there's a lot of different profiles here. But the ones I want are the circles on both sides, the two small circles, and this area here. So I can begin to select these. So I'm just selecting along, just left clicking each one of these different profiles. And let's say I start to extrude this out. And so I just click on the arrow and it starts to actually make it solid. So that's looking okay, but I did mention that I did want to try to keep this centered. So I'm going to do something here. I'm going to change this direction from one side to symmetric. And then again, I can define a distance to follow here. So I want it to be 2 inches wide. So we'll just do 1 inch and that's going to use that symmetric. But I forgot to add a couple of these profiles here. And I did that on purpose. Not all my mistakes are genuine. So at this point, I want to add some additional profiles here. So to do that, I'm going to use my control or command key. And you'll see that my tooltip is actually stolen my thunder. It's telling you to hold control if you're on a PC or hold the command key if you're on a Mac like I am. So I'm going to hold command. I'm going to click this region here. And I'm going to click this region here. And once I let go, it's going to enable me to preview that once again. Do a quick zoom to extent, double click the mouse wheel, looks good. Okay, so we're off to a pretty good start here. The next thing I want to make though, and we'll take a look at what it is that we're going to be adding next, is this bottom piece. So somewhere to attach this guy. So let's do that. Let's jump back into my design. And there's a couple different ways we could do it, right? We could sketch out a profile from the right-hand side that takes that, rounded shape and comes down like that. And we could just use an extrude there. We could sketch out a square and then we could use like a fillet tool to round off the edges. But in this case, I want to do something kind of special here. I do want to actually create an offset plane and then run this next feature into the saddle piece that we've built so far. So it'll make more sense when I actually get into it. So I'm going to use the drop down under construct here to create an offset plane. And this is just a way to sketch out in space. Right now, I don't really have any planes that I could sketch off of the bottom here. So using the existing origin planes, I can select one and just kind of drag it down and get it into the general vicinity I want it. And then I can key in a value. I think 3.25 probably makes sense for this. So now I have this plane down here and I can use that to sketch out this next feature. So I'm going to grab my sketch tool and I'm going to select this plane that I just created, obviously. And I'm going to rotate partially down, but then once I can see this on the view cube, I can select it from there to get a nice clean look at this directly on. So at this point, let's sketch out a rectangle. And I want a special type of rectangle. I don't want this, 2-point rectangle. I want it to be centered once again, and I have that origin that I can leverage. So I'm going to use the drop down here to grab my rectangle tool, and I'm going to select my center rectangle. And again, if I was in the normal rectangle tool, the 2-point rectangle tool, the default, I could always change from one to the other using this dialog that you see here. Anyway, using this, I can click on the center point and I can sketch out this rectangle very quickly. And I can add a couple dimensions to fully tie this thing down. Like maybe I want to make the thickness of this 1/4 inch. Just click to add the dimension, select the item you want to add the dimension to, and just drop it there. And that's it. That's a really simple sketch, but that's all I really want to accomplish at this point. So once I'm happy with that sketch, again, I can stop the sketch, or I don't really need to stop the sketch. If I hit the E key on my keyboard, it takes me to that shortcut to my extrude command, and I can again select that profile to actually extrude out. Now the reason why I built this way is that I can do something nice here. I can say I want this to not go a specific distance. I want this to actually end at the existing body. And let me show you why this is not a good idea to do it this way. So I'm going to actually do a real quick side note here. So if I say I want to join those, but I do it by distance, if I go later and I actually move the location of that plane down further, there's a possibility we could disconnect that from that piece. So you have to think about your end constraints of how the feature is going to end. And this is why I built it this way. It just helps build in a little bit of intelligence. So I'm going to just do a Command Z 2 times to undo that. But this time I'm going to do this as I intended originally. I'm going to extrude out this guy. I'm going to say I want it to go up to an existing body. So using the extent drop down there, I can change it from a distance, which we used previously, which you saw has some limitations, and I can go instead to a body, which I can just select from the graphics area. Now, no matter where that plane goes, and you can see I can access the plane creation from my timeline here. I can just double click or right click and edit the feature. No matter where this thing goes, it's always going to end at that right location. Okay, so now to round out the bottom here, I'm going to do a fillet. So not all features that you do require that you actually make a sketch and do all that, as you saw with the primitive. But a fillet is a really common command. It's similar to a chamfer, but it enables you to round off your edges. So let's grab my fillet command and we'll select the edges. And you'll notice that when I'm in this tool, it automatically wants to select edges. It makes it really easy to apply these features. So I'm going to select this edge here, and I'm going to select this edge over here. I can even select through is what I was trying to highlight there, but my angle was not really advantageous for that. So let's apply this at 1 because I know the thickness of this thing is 2 inches, and you can see that does a perfectly rounded bottom for this. And just like that, we've rounded this thing out. Let's go ahead and just OK that. And then again, I'm going to use my mouse tools. And you can see that's just another one of these little options that you can access from right-clicking and holding. All right, so let's go ahead and add a hole to this edge here and a hole to the opposite edge here. If you look at the finished model there, it's just to hold the pins that are going to kind of tie this thing together. So jumping back into my model, I'm going to do this again with another applied feature. So if I hit the H key on my keyboard or hit the hole button, it's going to enable me to actually drop this hole into a specific location without having to sketch out a circular shape to begin with. So I'm going to just move my cursor into this area here, and I'm not worried about placing it perfectly on the first drop. Once I just drop it in there, I can get into playing with the size. Like for instance, I do want this to only be, a 1/4 inch. I'll just type in 0.25. And then also I can play with the location a lot easier once it's been dropped, right? So if I click and hold on the center icon there, it'll enable me to drop this in locations. And you'll see that because there's actually a center to this circle here, it enables me to snap to that point very easily. And I can also make sure that this goes through. This again is one of those times where if I don't define this in the correct way, if I want this hole to always go through, I need to actually do this properly. If I use a distance here, it might not work if I make that saddle wider. So let's change this to all. So that'll just ensure that no matter where this, no matter how wide this saddle gets, it's always going to have that hole through it. So we'll just OK that real quick. And I want the same thing on the other side. And let's just do this real quick using another tool. So I'm going to hit the S key on my keyboard this time. And this brings up another toolbox. And this is modal, so because I'm in a modeling design environment, I can see some different things that I can do from a modeling standpoint. If I were in a CAM workspace, I'd see something different. If I was in a sketch, I'd see something different as well. What I want to do here is I want to mirror that feature, right? I don't want to have to redo the whole feature once again. I'm going to select my mirror tool. I can mirror this as a feature. I can mirror it as a face as well. So here's where I can select my pattern type. What's what I was referring to as faces, bodies, features, or components. In this case, I just want to mirror the face. Really, that'll work for me. And then I can select the mirror plane. And this is, again, one of these reasons why designing about that center workspace is a good idea. It helps you out in the long run. So once I'm happy, I can click OK. And there we go. We can see I've created that hole on the opposite side there. Okay, so I am a little bit behind schedule. One thing I do want to show you is that I do want to do a cut here, and then we'll start to assemble this together real quick. So at this point, let's go ahead and create that cut to accommodate both the pins that I'll be making and also the top piece of this saddle or the pipe clamp. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually expand out the saddle component from my browser. I can expand out the sketches. I can see those two sketches that I used to build it so far. And I want to use this guy, and I'm actually just going to reuse it to do a quick cut. So I'm going to grab my extrude tool once again. And in this case, I can select to do some profiles once again, and I can select these three profiles here. And at this point, I do want this to go both directions, but I want to show you real quick what it's going to do. So if I click and drag that, it's going to automatically want to remove material. The reason for that is that it recognizes that there's already a body there. So if there's already a body there, it starts to remove material. If there's not a body there, it starts to add material. So what I was saying there before, though, is that I want this to go both directions. So I want it to be symmetric. And just like that, I can reuse that sketch to actually get in and create some more details to this design. Now I can add additional features. I can add fillets and various other things to kind of round this thing down maybe. That's a bad example. There we go. And this is another one of these features where if you actually start to preview it, if you want to add additional edges to round off, you have to hold the Control or Command key to add those additional edges. So we'll add those edges there. Maybe I'll add these edges here. And just like that, we're getting this to look appropriate for what we're trying to accomplish there. Okay, so we're good with that. Let's go ahead and add the pins to this. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new component once again. I'm going to select not the saddle as my parent. I want to make sure that I always select the top level if this is just another part and not a piece of a sub-assembly. And at this point, I can give it the name, the pin name, and click OK. So this pin I'm going to do really quickly. I'm going to just use one of these simple pieces here, primitive, and I'm just going to extrude this through this, and I want to say I want this to be -2 inches long. And pay attention to the, positive, negative, that's going to play into how this works. But just like that, you can see how quickly I was able to create one of the pins for this piece that we're working on. Now, this is going to have 2 pins, obviously, right? So let's copy this pin, Control-C and Control-V. Well, let's activate the top level name here. Let's Control-C and Control-V this guy. And then I can slide this new version of this over. Once you paste in a component that you might have copied, it actually gives you this move command. It's always accessible later on down the line. I'm going to hide the pipe at this point so you guys can see this a little bit better. But at this point, I want this pin to be located in this location, right? So the way that we're going to assemble this is with joints in Fusion 360. Joints are extremely powerful. You're going to see how quickly and easily you're going to be able to design and build your models up in a very short amount of time. So let's go ahead and select to do a joint. And this is going to be accessible from the drop-down under Assemble. So I'm going to select the joint here. And here I'm going to select the 2 components that I want to join together. And as I scroll this over various items, you can see it's going to enable me to snap to maybe the center of this, or it's going to enable me to snap to the end of this cylindrical cut. It makes it real simple to select and orient these things. In this case, I want to select the end piece of this and also this edge here. And that's going to place that in the correct location. And you'll notice that once it got into the correct location, it kind of animated there. If I hit the play button once more, you'll see it once again. what this is saying is that these two bodies are actually going to be kind of fixed to one another. They're rigid to one another. So that's what I want in that case. I don't really care if that rotates. It's not going to help me visualize the mechanics of this system. So let's go ahead and just click OK to that. And that's been jointed into place. On the other side here, if I click and move this guy, and now all I did is I clicked and dragged, it's going to not maintain that location. It's because it doesn't have that joint that ties it into that location. Using this position tool, I can revert it to that original location, or if I do it one more time, I can hit Control Z to undo that. When you design a model like I have here, where it's actually in the exact location where I want it, I can use a really simple joint operation. It's called an as-built joint. And you'll see that you'll use this all the time, especially if you're working with imported models, because a lot of times you design everything in context to one another. I mean, this is a single modeling environment. I don't have to use assembly style, files. I don't need to use part style files to actually build this up. I can actually do everything within the same environment and build out components and parts, subassemblies, etc., using the methods that I've been showing you here. So using an as-built joint, all you really need to do is select the two parts. You don't need to worry about what joint you're selecting or what edge you're selecting to create this. You just select the two components. It sees how they're oriented and enables you to create that rigid joint once again. Okay, so in this case, I do want to speed it up a little bit. There's some other pieces I want to drop into this. The top clamp piece. So there's a case where, you might want to design something in another model and you want to reuse it. In this case, it's this top clamp piece. I just don't have enough time to build it. So if I right click and select insert into current design. Oh, it's making me save. I should have been saving a lot more often, but it's always a good idea to save. It'll actually build up versions in the background, one of the really neat aspects of Fusion 360. So we save that. Now I can insert this pipe clamp top piece into my current design. And you'll see it actually pops pretty close to where I want it, but I have some issues there, and I'll just move it out of the way so you can see what I want to do here. So, obviously one of the big issues there is that it's not wide enough to accommodate it the way it is right now. But let's do a joint here, and let me show you a nice little feature to join something like this together. So I'm going to hit the J key on my keyboard to capture the position, to create my joint. And in this case, I want to use the center piece here. And you can see, if you have trouble selecting the center edge that you see here, one thing that I'd recommend that you do is that you can hold Command while you're over like the cylindrical face, and it'll keep it highlighted. So no matter where I go now, it's going to enable me to select that midpoint of that face to just make sure it's dead centered on this. So again, you can do it without it, but it does, if you hold Command or Control on your keyboard, it's going to enable you to select that center edge real easily, and that one as well. So that's going to center that. But rigid's not how I want this guy to be made, right? I'm going to close my data panel so you can see this. I do want this to rotate, so I'm going to change this from rigid to revolute, and that's going to enable this to rotate around that edge. So that's great. That's exactly what I want, right? So that's the 1 degree of freedom I want to free up, and that's what you do with using joints. Now, I do need to make a change here to accommodate that a little bit better, and let's see, what feature was that? I think it was this guy right here, right? So if I'm not unsure, I can just scroll over my timeline. It'll highlight, and if I select it, it's going to show me what they are. If I right click and select edit feature, I can make this a little bit wider to accommodate that. A little too wide, but that's all right. Now on the other side here, I do want to add another piece of hardware. And again, I'm going to do this from an existing design. So I'm going to insert into current design. And again, I do want to place it out in space so you can see how to join it together. Now, this piece has actually got some additional geometry, if you will, in the center of this, and I want to get rid of that. And to do that, I need to actually unlink this. So if I right-click, I can break the link, and that'll enable me to make design changes to this piece of hardware within this context. But one of the things I absolutely love about Fusion 360 is the ability to make design changes like this. So if I want to get rid of this, I mean, I could sketch out a circle and I could do a cut, but this is really simple. If I could just command or control select both of those faces that represent the bottom face and the cylindrical face of that additional piece, I hit the delete key on my keyboard. So yeah, I just need to activate that, and you can delete faces very easily. And it works with like filleted edges. Like here I can select, the edges that go around this guy. And if I want to just get rid of that fillet, I just need to select all the faces. Once I hit delete, it's going to undo that. And you can actually do things like add threads really simply in models in Fusion 360. So in this case, I'm going to hit my S key to bring up my model toolbox once again, and I'm going to just search for thread. And this command search is going to save you a lot of time, a lot of trouble of looking through and trying to find specific commands, because you see how easy it was for me to actually find that. Once I find that, I can select the model that I want to add the thread to, and I can actually model this. And if I zoom in here, you'll see it doesn't look very good on the bottom here because it does that full length. So I can change that, and I can have it just go a particular length. This is a little more accurate to life, true life. All right, so let's join this together using my joint, and real quickly just place that there. And the last thing that I want to do is I actually want to bring in a wingnut for this, right? This needs to be removed and added, and just easy to alter basically. So I'm going to activate the top level component once again here, and I'm going to use a really cool tool that I recommend that you all look at if you're not in Fusion, or if you're in Fusion already and you're making things like this. But I'm going to go up to Insert. I'm going to select Insert McMaster Car Component, and this brings up my McMaster Car, full directory of parts. This doesn't mean that every single part in here will come into Fusion 360, but all your main pieces, your nuts, your bolts, your all kinds of stuff, actually casters. If I do a search for a wing nut and find one here, select the type, and then get into maybe the size, the 1/4 inch size. I know that hardware is 1/4 inch. I select product details here, and down below here, if they have 3D models, you can see there's all these various types that you can use. I found that these SAT files, what are those? Are they they're not parasolids? I gotta double check that. The SAT files work the best. Are they IGES? No, IGES has its own name. Anyway, if I insert this in here, you can see how easy it is, again, to manipulate and move it around. It actually takes on the McMaster Car part number. So if you need to go and order this thing later, you can do so very easily. But again, I can just, join this together using my joints and just kind of tie this thing down. Actually, I probably could use a washer on this or something to place it a little bit easier, but I'll just place it there. I can flip that, and then I can play with the offset to kind of place it a little bit closer to where I want it. I am missing the washer. That would be a good thing to add in there, but just like that, you can see how quickly and easily it was for me to actually make this model up. But that doesn't include, every piece of Fusion 360. There's quite a lot that we can do. If I ground the saddle component, I can now, slide these things around. The things like the revolute joints that we created, I can build a slider joint that actually place that. If I jump back into the finished model here, I spent a little more time on this one, obviously, but I can slide this thing up and down. I can rotate this guy. I can open this up. And, by building these designs within this 3D environment, you can learn quite a lot about them as you're building them, or, as you're designing them. One thing that I like to show here is that you can do some things to understand, how well it's going to work, essentially. So if I do something here, I can enable contact sets and then add a contact set between, say, this part and this part. And once I do that, when I slide this, you'll see it's actually going to bottom out. You see it's actually going to hit the edge of this because I built that up a little too tight. So one thing I can do to fix that is I can just edit this offset feature that I've created here. So I can slide this up, and I can actually build up a little space there. And just like that, I can jump back into sliding that, and then I can continue to drag it till it hits again. So you can see, just how much information we get by this. And, if I want to understand why that's hitting now, I can do maybe a different way to interrogate this design. Maybe I want to inspect this and look through and see what's going on at a section analysis level. So I can slide this section view through here and I can see where that interference is happening. And, this could be, I could just round off this edge and get a little bit more clearance there to open this model up. If I click OK, it's going to keep that section view open. I don't necessarily want to keep it open. I'm going to go ahead and just hide that section view using the light bulb here to hide or show items. I think the last thing I did want to show here is that using these inspection tools, you can also learn about whether or not you have interferences between parts. So if I click this interference tool, I can select, every single component in this design. I can select to compute this interference. It's going to show me in the graphics area where I might have some interferences. So this wingnut hasn't been modeled properly, it looks like. Again, I could delete those out to fix that up. And in this case, I hadn't fixed that hardware, so that extra piece that you saw me remove before is still there. For that interference, actually, I could fix that with a combine. So I'm going to just hit S and do a quick combine. And this is going to enable me to combine my target body, which is this guy. This is the part I want to remove the body from. My tool body, which is going to be this guy. And I'm going to say cut. And I want to keep the tools because they're actually both components I really want here. Once I click OK, I can dig in and I can show you that that additional piece that I previously had there has been removed with that feature. When your design's done, you're not really done, right? Like you have a lot more things you need to do. I didn't get into drawing creation. I didn't get into rendering. Here you can see some renders that I created of this model. You can actually build in the mechanics, which you did see me demonstrate, but you can actually build animations like this to maybe demonstrate to someone how it is assembled or how it is, opened up. A lot of very crucial information can be translated this way. You can see I've done a simulation here to understand, what kind of displacements we'll have with a load on this. And you can also use CAM, although this part probably isn't made from a solid block of aluminum or steel or whatever I'm using in this example. But, water jet, we have the ability to do. We have lathing options. There are quite a lot of different tools that we can use in the CAM side. What I would recommend to you, new users, is get into the gallery, maybe the Fusion 360 gallery, open up some existing models and actually just use that slider at the bottom, the timeline slider. You can learn a lot about how someone built something and understand quite a lot that way. So additional resources going forward. I mean, obviously try to attend these webinars if you can. There's actually a full learning website that has, I think it's up to like 10 different videos at this point to help you understand. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're always, every Tuesday we put out a new quick tip. We put out tutorials, sporadically, and I mean, I'd say probably, one or two a week actually. So sporadically is probably not the right term to use there, but quite a lot of information. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, get on there, get on the forum. There's a lot of information that can be very helpful to you. So I want to thank everyone for attending. Sorry I went a little long there. I usually actually cut it at about 45 minutes. That's my attention span. Again, appreciate everyone's time. If you did ask questions and I didn't answer them, I will do it by email. I always do that. I guarantee it to you. So again, thanks everyone for attending. I hope everyone learned something today. Have a great one.